The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house as Olivia cast a look of contempt at the imposing man before her. She clutched the handkerchief in her hands, trying to control the anger bubbling in her chest. Charles, a corpulent man dressed in a suit that barely seemed to fit his robust frame, remained impassive. The sweat on his forehead betrayed his anxiety, though he tried to mask it. "I will never love you," Olivia declared, her voice firm yet full of pain. Her eyes shimmered with restrained tears, but her gaze was defiant. Charles let out a long sigh, feeling each of her words like a knife twisting into his pride. He wasn't a fool. He knew the young brunette before him hadn't chosen to be there. He had bought her. There was no choice, not for him nor for her. Just a financial transaction, sealed by a cold and emotionless contract with the signature of her father, hungry for money. "Olivia, I know this is difficult," he began, trying to soften his voice. "But I can give you everything: wealth, security, a future anyone would envy." "I don't want any of that," she replied bitterly. "Do you think you can buy love, Charles? That a pile of money changes everything?" Charles recoiled slightly. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, so willing to expose the truths he tried to hide even from himself. For years, he had dealt with judgmental stares, with the inferiority that came with his extra weight, with the thinly veiled disdain of the wealthy people around him. He felt on the margins, isolated. Now, he had the power to change that narrative, but it seemed he had only widened the chasm. "Olivia," he whispered, unsure if he was speaking more to himself or to her. I just wanted someone." She averted her gaze, feeling the weight of desperation in his voice, but she didn't want to give in. "You can want whatever you like, Charles, but love isn't something you buy, and I will never be part of this illusion you've created." The tension hung in the air, heavy and silent, each unspoken word intensifying the gulf between them. Charles felt the emptiness growing, consuming him. The story of Charles Morrison began long before his last name became synonymous with wealth and power. Raised in a small suburb of Detroit, he was the son of a factory worker and a seamstress. From an early age, Charles learned the meaning of humiliation. In school, he endured the laughter of children who didn't forgive his weight. He was a chubby, shy boy with an appetite that seemed impossible to satisfy. Food had always been a refuge from the world that excluded him. Over time, it became more than mere comfort. It became an addiction, an escape valve. Determined to win, to escape from the world that made him feel lesser, he knew he would never earn others' respect for his appearance, so he sought power and money as a way to build his own worth. After years of study and relentless work, Charles became one of the most influential men in the financial sector, a businessman with an enviable fortune. But deep down, he knew his body remained his greatest burden. At parties, disdainful glances still followed him, and he felt trapped between the powerful man he was and the rejected boy who still lived within him. It was in this context that the idea of an arranged marriage emerged, a way out of his isolation. Charles believed that with a wife by his side, someone to fill the emptiness, he would finally have the respect he had sought so long. That's how he found Olivia, offered as the perfect solution by an agent interested in uniting fortunes, with little regard for the emotional cost of the transaction. Olivia, on the other hand, came from a completely different world. Raised in a small town in rural Texas, she knew poverty up close. The daughter of a struggling farmer, Olivia learned early on to be resilient and to value the small things in life. Her family never had much, but she always dreamed of making her own way, far from a modest life and the limitations imposed by lack of money. Despite this, she never imagined that her own father would sell her to settle debts. Charles Morrison sat in his opulent office, surrounded by piles of documents and staggering figures. But among the numbers and charts, his gaze drifted to a distant, deeper place. He knew that by buying that marriage contract, he was buying more than a wife. He was buying the possibility of companionship, someone to sit by his side at parties and help him bury the emptiness that consumed him. Meanwhile, in a humble home in rural Texas, Olivia looked at her father with incredulous eyes. His words echoed in her mind, impossible to fully absorb. "You can't be serious, Dad," Olivia said, her voice trembling as she gripped the arm of the chair so tightly her fingers paled. "Olivia, His voice was a mixture of exhaustion and desperation. "Do you think I wanted this? That I wanted to sell my own daughter?" She recoiled, feeling his words hit her like a blow. "Then why do it? Why offer me to a man I've never met?" Her father averted his gaze, his hands trembling, as he pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. Olivia picked it up hesitantly, noticing the local bank's logo on the worn paper. As she opened it, reading the words of despair, she immediately understood. The money would run out. "They're going to take our home, Olivia, not just the house." Her father took a deep breath, struggling to keep his composure. "They're going to take our land, and if that happens, we have nowhere to go. We'll end up on the street." She tried to grasp his words, but the knot in her throat seemed to block any response. "Are you using my life as currency?" "This man, Charles Morrison, has promised to pay all of our family's debts. And it's not just that. He can give you a life I never imagined I could, my child," her father argued, trying to convince himself as much as her. "And what do you think this will cost me?" Olivia's words came out in a whisper. Her father sighed, looking at her with a devastated expression. "I know it's not fair, Olivia, but you have a chance to save yourself, to save us. It's a sacrifice I need you to make." Olivia stood abruptly, crossing the small room, feeling every creak of the wooden floor beneath her feet. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to show how deeply this was hurting her, but the tears were already falling, hot and unstoppable. "And this man? This Charles? Does he think he can buy me like he's buying a horse, Dad?" She looked at him, furious. "What else does he want?" "He wants a wife," her father murmured. "Someone to accompany him, to give him an image of respect. He's a complicated man, and perhaps alone. I'm not going to do this. I can't do this." Her father lowered his gaze. "If you don't, Olivia, we'll lose everything." She looked at him, searching for a glimmer of compassion or hope, but his face was that of a defeated man, someone who had nothing left to offer. Across the country, Charles held Olivia's portrait, a worn photo sent by the agent. His expression was unreadable. He knew this was selfish, but he also knew that if it weren't for this arrangement, he'd never have a chance. Their meeting took place in a luxurious dining room at the most expensive hotel in town. Everything had been meticulously planned by Charles, who hoped to impress Olivia with the setting and perhaps lessen the barrier he already knew existed between them. He adjusted himself in his chair, nervously straightening his collar, feeling the cold sweat trickle down his neck. Despite being a powerful man, here, waiting for Olivia, he felt vulnerable. The door opened, and she entered with firm steps, a serious expression, and a gaze that seemed to pierce any hint of confidence he tried to maintain. Olivia wore an elegant blue dress, but her beauty was overshadowed by the stern expression she carried. "Mr. Morrison," she said, devoid of any emotion, settling into the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. Charles tried to smile, despite the chill already hanging in the air. "Please, Olivia, you can call me Charles." She tilted her head slightly, looking him up and down, not bothering to hide her disdain. "Charles, then, I imagine you called me here to show off more of your fortune. After all, the first part of the purchase was a success, wasn't it?" Charles swallowed hard, surprised by her coldness. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't anticipated being treated like a repulsive stranger. "Olivia, I just wanted to give us a chance to get to know each other. I know the circumstances weren't ideal and that you didn't have a choice," he said, trying to sound understanding. She let out a low, ironic laugh. "Oh, so you're aware of that? That I'm a prisoner in a gilded cage? That I was bought?" He lowered his gaze, his hands trembling as he fidgeted with the edge of his napkin. I wish things could have been different, Olivia. But I can take care of you, give you everything. Everything except freedom, right?" She shot back, her eyes sparking with anger. "Do you think an expensive dinner, a mansion, and jewelry will buy my heart? Do you think you can drown me in things so I'll forget what you took from me?" Charles hesitated, feeling the weight of her words. "I know I can never make up for that, but maybe if you give me a chance." "A chance?" she interrupted, her voice filled with disdain. "Look at you, Charles. I thought men with your kind of power would at least be attractive, but you're weak, cowardly, and desperate." He felt his face flush but tried to keep his composure. "I understand that you're angry, Olivia, but please, I am I am more than what you see. I'm not just a fat, powerful man. Olivia laughed, a bitter, scornful laugh. Oh, spare me. You bought a wife because no one would accept you as you are. And now you want me to pretend this is love or respect or something worth holding on to? Charles felt as if she were tearing away pieces of his dignity with each word. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before opening them again, looking at her with a vulnerability he had never shown anyone. I just wanted someone, so I wouldn't feel so alone. I know I'm not attractive, but I thought maybe we could help each other in some way. Be companions, he murmured, almost to himself. Olivia met his gaze with disdain, her words icy. Companions? I will never be your companion, Charles. Never. This marriage may be an obligation, but my contempt for you is the only thing I truly own. Charles stepped back, feeling her words like stabs to the heart. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, the silence seemed unbearable. He averted his gaze, gripping his napkin so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Olivia stood up, casting him one last disdainful look. I hope you enjoyed this dinner, Charles, because it's the most consideration you'll get from me. With that, she left, leaving Charles alone, devastated and crushed by the reality of their arranged marriage, a dream that was quickly revealing itself to be a nightmare. The move to Charles's mansion was as cold and formal as Olivia had imagined. She barely looked at him as she passed through the vast, gleaming foyer, ignoring his hopeful glances as they approached the grand marble staircase leading to the second floor. I hope you found the room comfortable, Charles offered, trying to sound welcoming, though he knew she would likely ignore any attempt at kindness. Without turning her face, Olivia replied, staring down the corridor ahead of her. It's everything that was paid for, isn't it? Charles swallowed, feeling the sting of her blunt words. Nevertheless, he continued guiding her, like a host trying to convince a reluctant guest to feel at home. Days passed in a heavy silence, and the mansion's vast space felt emptier than ever. Olivia spent her time exploring the property, trying to occupy her mind and distract herself from the situation she found herself in. She rarely saw Charles, and when she did, she avoided any prolonged interaction. To her, he was just a shadow, a man who filled the space with his heavy, insecure presence. But one night, as she passed by his study, Olivia heard a muffled conversation and stopped, intrigued by the intensity of Charles's tone. I already said the donation will be made this month, he was saying, with a mix of firmness and frustration. The children need those funds, and I won't accept any delay. Curiosity overcame her pride, and she edged closer, peering through the slightly open door. She saw Charles on a call, talking to someone about a significant donation to a local orphanage. There was a genuine determination in his voice, something she hadn't noticed before. I don't care if it means cutting other costs. The children won't suffer because of bureaucracies, he continued, irritated. Tell the board that this is my final word. Olivia felt slightly unsettled. The figure before her was very different from the selfish, shallow man she had imagined. Instead of a millionaire obsessed with himself, Charles was showing a sincere concern for those in need, and his voice, though stern, carried a weight of responsibility. The call ended, and he sighed, massaging his temples with a tired look. She took a step back, but Charles noticed her and, surprised, tried to hide his exhaustion. Olivia, do you need something? She hesitated, noticing the genuine wariness on his face and wondering how she had never seen it before. I heard about the donation, she said, crossing her arms as if to shield herself from any vulnerability this conversation might bring. He shrugged, unsure how to respond. It's something I do every year. The children, well, I know what it's like to feel like you have nothing. She stared at him for a moment, her gaze softening a bit. I didn't expect that from you. I always thought money was the only thing that mattered to you. Charles lowered his gaze, looking thoughtful. I thought that too, for a long time. But over time, I learned it's the one thing that can really make a difference for people who need it. Olivia remained silent, taking in his words. There was something in his manner that revealed a hidden loneliness, an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. She felt torn between her anger over what he had done and a troubling curiosity about this man who seemed more complex than he let on. In the following days, Olivia observed Charles from a distance, increasingly intrigued. She began to notice small acts of kindness, like when she saw him give generous tips to the household staff or assist them with trivial tasks, things she never would have expected from someone with his fortune. One evening, Olivia found him in the kitchen, preparing a meal alone, his sleeves rolled up and an improvised apron tied around his waist. "You cook?" she asked, surprised, as he turned to face her, looking a bit embarrassed but with a shy smile. "Yes, sometimes," he replied without pretense. "It's one of the few things I enjoy doing without thinking about work." For a moment, she stood there, watching him stir the pot, and felt a faint spark of empathy for the man who, beneath his exterior, seemed like someone in search of a genuine connection. It was a sunny morning, and the mansion's gym was bathed in the light streaming through the large windows. Olivia was focused on her workout, doing intense sets of crunches and push-ups, her toned arms and legs moving with precision. She always found relief in exercise, a way to ease tension and reorganize her thoughts. And that morning, she dove even deeper into her routine, pushing away the complex emotions that Charles was beginning to stir in her. Charles, passing by the hallway on his way to his office, stopped when he saw Olivia in the gym. He watched her in silence, admiring the strength and determination with which she moved. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, her face focused, her body agile and flexible. He noticed the slight sheen of sweat on her skin, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Without realizing it, a smile crept onto his face. She looked untouchable, free and intense, as if the world around her disappeared while she moved. Charles stood there, a bit embarrassed for admiring her, but unable to look away. He felt captivated, not just by Olivia's obvious beauty, but by the strength she exuded. A strength he didn't possess but longed to attain. Suddenly, Olivia stopped exercising and turned to the side, noticing Charles standing at the door. She raised an eyebrow and gave him an amused look. "Enjoying the view, Charles?" she asked, a mischievous smile on her lips. Charles looked visibly flustered, blushing and laughing awkwardly. I was just, passing by," he replied, scratching the back of his neck, clearly unsure of how to justify his presence. Sure, she replied, laughing. "You were just passing by. For 10 minutes, I assume." He let out a laugh, trying to seem casual. "You know, the view from here is interesting." "Interesting?" Olivia repeated, crossing her arms with a playful smile. "For someone who never sets foot in the gym, you seem awfully curious about what goes on here." Charles tried not to feel embarrassed, but he couldn't hide his discomfort. "Well, I admire your dedication," he murmured. "I was never much for physical exercise, but I admire those who are." "I've noticed that," she teased, looking him up and down with a sly smile. "It wouldn't be a bad idea for you to start working out, you know. It's good for the body and the mind." Charles sighed, shaking his head. "I think I might be a bit out of shape for that." "Oh, so you're giving up before you even try?" she teased, her eyes glinting with mischief. "How sad. I thought the great Charles Morrison was a determined man." He chuckled, feeling challenged for the first time. "Giving up? No way. I just think it's not my thing." Olivia leaned in his direction, her smile sharp. "What if we made a bet then?" Charles looked at her, intrigued. "What kind of bet?" "Let's see who can run on the treadmill the longest," she said, gesturing to the machine beside her. "If I win, you start training with me 3 times a week, and if you win..." She paused, smiling. "Well, I think we still need to find something you actually have a chance of winning." Charles laughed, pretending to be offended. "Is that how you see my odds?" "Just being realistic," she teased, her smile full of confidence. "But who knows? Maybe you'll surprise me." Charles looked at the treadmill, clearly skeptical, but the idea of impressing her and the implicit challenge in her gaze stirred something in him. For a brief moment, he felt like the young boy who wanted to prove something to himself and the world. "All right," he said, straightening up and trying to mask his insecurity. "I accept the bet. And Olivia, get ready, because you're underestimating the great Charles Morrison." Olivia laughed, genuinely surprised and pleased with his response. "I'm gonna love watching you try, Charles. Who knows? I might even end up impressed." In the days following the bet, Charles surprised Olivia by showing up on time for every training session. At first, he felt out of place and insecure, stumbling over the equipment and laughing at himself as he tried to keep up with her pace. Olivia, however, always offered encouragement, a smile in the middle of a tough set, and with each session, he felt the tension between them lessen, giving way to an unexpected and, for Charles, deeply desired friendship. "Come on, Charles!" Olivia cheered as he struggled through one last set of push-ups. Just 3 more. 2, 1. He collapsed on the mat, gasping but laughing. "Are you sure you're not a professional trainer?" he asked, smiling as he caught his breath. "I never thought anyone could motivate me like this." "Well, you also never thought you'd be here," she replied, tossing him a water bottle. "For a man who started out by falling when he got on the treadmill, you're doing pretty well." They laughed together, and Charles realized that not only was his body changing, but something inside him was, too. For the first time, he felt like someone saw beyond his appearance and his wealth. He felt that Olivia truly saw who he was inside. Months passed, and as the workouts continued, Charles began to notice visible results. He lost weight and gained confidence, and over time, his clothes, which once felt tight and uncomfortable, now started to fit better. Every achievement, every bit of progress seemed to bring him closer to Olivia, and the friendship between them was transforming into something deeper and more genuine. Then came the invitation to a gala. Charles hesitated to go, but Olivia encouraged him. "You've worked hard for this, Charles," she said, adjusting his bow tie as he tried to calm his nerves. "This is your chance to show how much you've changed." At the party, Charles and Olivia turned heads as soon as they arrived. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and she wore an elegant dress that highlighted her beauty even more. Yet, despite his newfound confidence, Charles could still feel the gazes around him, whispers that seemed to follow him as he walked across the room beside Olivia. And among those gazes, a comment from an old acquaintance hit him like a punch. "So, Morrison," said Henry Caldwell, an influential investor with a reputation for arrogance, an ironic smile on his lips. "I see you've brought quite a catch with you, but honestly, isn't Olivia a bit out of your league?" Charles froze, his face flushing with embarrassment. For a moment, the insecurity he had worked so hard to overcome threatened to unravel his newly earned progress. But before he could respond, Olivia stepped forward, her eyes shining with controlled fury. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone calm yet laced with firmness, "the only thing I see here is a man who defines himself by appearances and a lack of respect. Charles is more of a man than you could ever dream of being. And, frankly, standing beside him is a privilege that many don't deserve. Certainly not you." Caldwell opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Olivia took Charles's hand and led him away. Charles looked at her, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Olivia. I never thought anyone would stand up for me like that," he murmured, his heart racing as he took in her determined gaze. "You deserve to be defended, Charles," she replied, holding his hand firmly. "You're an incredible man, with or without the weight you once carried. And anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth your time." Charles didn't know how to respond. He felt seen, even desired, and for the first time in his life, beside Olivia, he felt like the man he had always wanted to be. The party went on, but nothing seemed to matter beyond that moment, that look she gave him that made him feel special. In the following months, Charles committed even more to his training, shedding more weight and gaining a physique he had never imagined he could achieve. Olivia was there with him every step, encouraging him, challenging him, and their workouts became their special time together. She started noticing details she hadn't seen before. His shy smile, the affectionate look he'd cast her way when he thought she wasn't noticing. One day, as they finished a run, Olivia realized that something else had changed. Not only in Charles, but in herself as well. She watched him laugh, his eyes bright with newfound confidence, and felt a spark of affection that was more than just friendship. As they exchanged a glance that lingered longer than usual, Olivia realized that maybe something in her heart was changing too. The months had transformed Charles into a man that few would recognize. His face was more defined, and his body, now athletic and strong, reflected the dedication he put into each workout. More than that, his confidence was evident. Charles Morrison was no longer the shy, insecure man who once avoided eye contact. Now he walked with purpose, drawing the attention of many, including Olivia, who watched him with a mix of admiration and surprise. At one of the galas Charles had begun to frequent more often, Olivia noticed something that unsettled her. An attractive, well-dressed woman named Vanessa, a prominent heiress and friend among high society, seemed particularly interested in Charles. Vanessa followed him with her gaze, and at one point during the evening, approached him with an inviting smile. "Charles, you're truly unrecognizable," Vanessa remarked, lightly touching his arm. "I can hardly believe the same man I knew years ago could transform like this." Charles, surprised and slightly flustered, smiled shyly. "Well, I had some great motivation," he replied, glancing briefly at Olivia, who watched from a distance with an expression that mingled surprise and discomfort. Olivia tried to mask the tightening in her chest, but it was impossible to deny what she felt. A troubling jealousy stirred within her, a sense of loss she didn't want to admit. The thought that another woman might see in Charles, the incredible man he had become, unsettled her. She averted her gaze, trying to push away those confusing emotions. At the end of the night, as they walked back to the mansion, Charles noticed Olivia's unusual silence. Determined not to let anything remain unresolved between them, he stopped at the mansion's entrance and faced her, hoping to understand what was troubling her. "Olivia, are you all right? You seem distant," he asked, his voice filled with concern. She hesitated, looking away. "Yes, I'm fine. I was just thinking," she replied, unwilling to reveal the true reason for her unease. Charles, however, continued watching her with an intensity she couldn't ignore. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, his words spilling forth with a sincerity that took her by surprise. "Olivia, I need to tell you something," he began, looking her directly in the eyes. "I know that for a long time, I hid behind my weight, my insecurities. I know you never wanted this marriage, this situation." Her eyes widened, caught off guard by the direction of his words. "I've changed a lot since you came into my life," Charles continued, his voice laden with emotion. "You brought a light I never thought I deserved. You showed me I could be someone better, someone worthy of happiness. And for that, I want you to know that if you want to, I'll let you go." Olivia stared at him, speechless, unsure of how to respond. He went on, struggling against the evident pain in his voice. "I don't want to keep you here, Olivia. Even if it hurts me, I'd rather see you happy, even if that's far from me. You have every right to return to your family, to the life you wanted before all of this," he said, with a sad smile. "I just want you to know I expect nothing from you, beyond what you're willing to give." Olivia felt her heart tighten. She hadn't expected such generosity from him, nor the depth of his feelings. Charles, the man she once imagined to be a heartless tyrant, was now willing to give up his own love just to ensure her happiness. She shook her head, still processing his words. "Charles, I didn't know you felt this way. I thought that all of this was just a matter of pride for you." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Olivia, none of this is about pride. It's about you. You've changed my life in ways I can hardly describe. And if you want to leave, I just want you to know that I understand." Olivia stayed silent, moved by the depth of his feelings, while sensing something new blossoming in her own heart. He looked at her with such sincerity that the thought of leaving him now felt impossible to bear. The image of Vanessa and other women interested in him crossed her mind, and she realized that perhaps she wasn't ready to leave him, nor to share him with anyone else. Without saying another word, Olivia held his hand, squeezing it gently, signaling that, for now, she had no intention of going anywhere. Charles smiled, a soft smile, as if that small gesture was the answer he'd been waiting for. Their relationship blossomed in the small details of their shared days. They laughed, exchanged confidences, and the nights that once felt lonely in the mansion transformed into moments of companionship and friendship. Charles still didn't dare confess the love growing within him, but each gesture, each smile revealed just how deeply he had embraced this new life with Olivia by his side. One evening, after a casual dinner on the veranda, they sat watching the stars, a gentle breeze surrounding them. Without thinking, Charles reached out and held Olivia's hand. She looked at him surprised, but didn't pull away. Her eyes shone with an intensity he had never seen before. "Olivia," he murmured, unable to look away, "I need to tell you how much you mean to me. You've changed my life in ways I never imagined." She smiled, gently touching his face. "Charles, you've changed my life too. I think you've turned me into someone I didn't even know." For a moment, they sat in silence, the words lingering between them. Charles leaned in, his heart racing, and Olivia closed her eyes. Then, as if the world around them faded away, they kissed. It was a soft kiss, but filled with deep emotion, a promise of something new and true. When they pulled back, Charles gently touched her face, both of them smiling with the warmth of two people who had found a home in each other. Months passed, and the love between Olivia and Charles deepened. They became inseparable, their companionship blossoming into a passion and tenderness that bound them together in an unbreakable way. One day, while they were organizing things for a small trip, Olivia felt a sudden dizziness. Concerned, Charles insisted that she see a doctor. Days later, they returned to the doctor's office together to hear the diagnosis. The doctor smiled, delivering news that would change their lives forever. Olivia was pregnant. Charles was in shock, his face lighting up with indescribable happiness as Olivia held his hand, deeply moved. "A child, our child," he murmured, almost in a whisper. "I never imagined this could happen." Olivia laughed, her eyes filled with tears. "Charles, our baby will be the most beautiful thing in the world. They'll be loved above all else." The coming months were filled with preparations and tender moments. Charles made it a point to accompany Olivia to every appointment, and their love seemed to grow with every little movement they felt from the baby. He pampered her and cared for her with absolute devotion, and she knew that the man who had once been her buyer was now the love of her life, someone she never wanted to be without again. When the baby was finally born, Charles could hardly contain his tears. He held his daughter for the first time, feeling a wave of gratitude and pure love he'd never thought himself capable of experiencing. "Our little girl," he whispered, gently caressing his daughter's face, with Olivia beside him, exhausted but radiant. The small family became inseparable. Charles continued with his business, but now with a much greater reason for everything he did: his wife and daughter. The life that once felt empty and marked by isolation was now filled with laughter, family dinners, and a happiness he had never imagined he could live. Olivia, who once dreamed of escaping that marriage, found in it her true purpose and a love she had never believed could exist. The once cold mansion was now a home where every day she saw her daughter's smile and Charles's affectionate gaze, her husband and partner. Together, they built a life founded on love, respect, and gratitude. Charles, once isolated and insecure, became a confident and complete man. Olivia, who once felt trapped, now lived in love and freedom, knowing she had made the right choice. And so, the story of Charles and Olivia, which had begun with a cold agreement, ended in deep love and a new family, content with all they had found in each other. Together, they walked toward the future with the certainty that life was, after all, the most surprising of journeys.